is the purpose of life? Without knowing the purpose of life, we can live meaningless lives with despair, going through depressing times. It's really important for us to know what is the purpose of life. But before we go into this, there's a few points, 3 points I want to go into that are very important in understanding what is the purpose of life. Well, firstly, purpose precedes existence. I'll explain that in a moment. And the purpose comes from the creator of a thing. And also the value of creation can be realized only when the purpose is being fulfilled. For example, purpose precedes existence. Well, we think of any existence, for example, the existence of a pen, a simple pen. What is the purpose of the pen? Obviously to write, but actually, if that pen was placed in the hands of primitive people who never saw a pen before, they wouldn't know that value. They'd look at it, they start stabbing the wall with it, and they would not know the value of that pen. But if we understand, it was designed for a purpose by a person, and we look at it, we can understand it can be used for writing. I think a more difficult example, maybe a computer, also is a creation by a man, by a person. But the purpose of the computer is not decided by the computer itself. Again, that is, the purpose of that is given at the time of its creation by the person who designed it. If the computer was placed among some primitive people who did not know, who never saw a computer before, what would they do? They'd look at it, they might use it for various purposes. They might use it as a table, but in the end, it will never realize its value. So the value comes from the purpose. But if a person who understands what a computer is, you can realize different programs you can do with it, then you can realize the real value of the computer. And the computer fulfills its purpose. So the value and the purpose are linked. It's very important. And the purpose is given not by the created thing itself, by the creator. In terms of human beings, we're not always a creator. We are, in one sense, a created being. And we're created by God. So likewise, the purpose of our existence doesn't just come from ourselves, it comes from our Creator, God. And so unless we understand that purpose, whatever it is, we'll never realize our real value, like the computer or the pen. And it's for that reason, I feel in history we've lived lives in despair, go through depressing times, because we did not know the purpose of our lives. So to find out what is the purpose of our life, we need to go back to our origin of our creation, which is God. So what kind of being is God? Well, Paul, the Apostle Paul in Romans 1:19-20, he said that God, who is invisible, expressed his invisible nature through his creation. So in other words, if we study his creation as a whole, we should be able to understand the nature of God, and from there we'll understand something about God. Well, first of all, we look at God's creation. We see it as in 5 main categories: people, animals, plants, molecules, and atoms. But we see 2 sets of duality. All things are internal and external. All things are masculine and feminine. There may be a few exceptions, but that's the general rule of things. People is mind and body, an internal part, an external part. Animals, mind and body. Plants, something corresponding to the mind and the external body part. Nature and form. But also everything's masculine and feminine. Men and women, male and female animals, stamen and pistil in plants, cations and anions, and protons and electrons. But what we can see from this, that things exist in relationships. They're relational beings. And just like Genesis says in Genesis 1:27, so God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. So all these things are in relationship. So God is very much a relational God. So the purpose of our life must be something to do with relationships. We find also in Genesis 1:28 what's recorded as the 3 blessings, where God said, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Here we see 3 distinct blessings. First, be fruitful, because it's not the same as often thought as multiplying. It says first be fruitful, then multiply. So something had to be done, to be achieved, before we multiply, before we marry. And this is to do with the relationship, the first kind of relationship we have, a relationship with ourselves, between our mind and body. That is actually a relationship. And then it's, within this is a relationship with God, but the part of us that relates with God is our inner part, our mind. And so this, we should reach fulfillment in this. And that's why in the Bible, for example, 1 Thessalonians 5:17-18, it reads, pray without ceasing, give thanks to all circumstances. So our mind should be in relationship to God. In this way, our mind should be, the priority in our life should be in our mind, and our mind should direct our body. In this way, I can control my inner world. In this way, and then God becomes part of our life. God has expressed himself through our life. What happened though, in reality, this was not realized through a fall. We've realized a failure of this meant that Satan dominates our lives, where the body dominates our mind, because it's a fallen person. And of course a person may not be intentionally evil, but without God we can't live a fulfilled life, and we lose control of our inner world. And of course, if we're created to live with God, and if we live without God, we can't function properly. So no wonder we have so many mental problems, depression is very high, and so on and so on. But we're not functioning properly. So we're created really to live with God 24 hours. We should know God more than we know other people. This is exactly what other biblical verses are referring to. First Corinthians 3:16 said, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? People often wonder, where is God? Well, that is where God is mostly present, or should be present, inside, within us. Jesus, he came as the Messiah 2,000 years ago, and he often spoke about in terms that he and his Father were one. But in this passage, he said, referring to a future date when God's ideal will be realized. He said in John 14:20, on that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. In other words, we also will become one with God, or should be at that time. In Matthew 5:48, it said, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So that's the state we're supposed to be in, this state of oneness with God, or of perfection. In this state, we're one with God, we're in a happier state. Should we function normally? But the problem is we've lost that. We've fallen into this state, we've lost control of our inner world, and we lost God. And we fell into a state where, as Jesus said in John 8:44, you are of your father the devil, and you choose to do your Father's desires. So again, we may not be intentionally evil, we may consider ourselves quite righteous, but without God, inadvertently we're doing things that are more in line with Satan's will than God's. So another way of looking at this is the two purposes we have, the whole purpose and individual purpose. These two purposes are linked. See, in the perfect person, where his priority is centered on his mind directs his body, he naturally lives for the whole purpose. The whole purpose means the desire to give joy to God and others as a priority. And the individual purpose means a desire to find my own joy, my own fulfillment. See, in the ideal sense, we think of God first, we think of other people first. And when we bring joy to other people, our own joy and happiness gets included in it. It's like what Jesus said once, seek first the kingdom of God, and all the other things you want will be realized with it. So that's the ideal sense, ideal case. But unfortunately we fell from this state. The fallen person puts his focus on his body and his individual purpose. In other words, I have to sort out my own problems first. I have to bring my own fulfillment, my own joy, my own happiness, and then I'll think about the whole. That's a common way of thinking. But does it work? It can't work. If you try to solve all your problems, you'll always find problems. And you'll never find your time to do anything other than live for yourself. And that's the sad case of this world today. It's a fragmented world because we're cut off from each other. We're not functioning properly. So we don't fulfill any purpose in the end. So the second blessing should come after fulfilling that first blessing of reaching individual perfection. It means a perfect man, a man who's one with God, who has control of his inner world, he lives for the sake of others, a mature person. He meets a woman who also has realized her individual perfection, one with God, come together. This is a perfect match, a loving couple. There's no evil there because it hasn't existed, no way to learn it. And then their children would resemble that loving parents. So they'll become ideal couples themselves. So in other words, an ideal family would be realized where God is there in it. From an ideal society, ideal nation, ideal world. That should have been realized from the beginning. But, again, through the fall, we could not realize this. We couldn't realize the first blessing. We could not realize the second blessing. So what happened was, we've come together as couples in this world, but not centered on God, but centered on Satan. And this coming together has never been an ideal relationship. That's why the family suffered the worst throughout history. We never had ideal families. So we had a fallen family, from a fallen society, fallen nation, and fallen world. So these relationships had not been close, because without God, they cannot be realized. The third blessing, to have dominion. This is to do our relationship with the creation, the things of creation. So if we were one with God, we realize the first and the second blessing, we're one with God, we would understand with God the nature of the world, the nature of things, the natural law. And we would be able to have a good relationship with nature. We wouldn't have polluted the atmosphere. Science would probably develop very quickly. We would have created a beautiful, highly developed scientific world as we have today millions of years ago, probably. But we didn't realize that because of the fall. And when we separate from God, we could never have an ideal relationship with the creation. That's why it's taken us thousands or even millions of years to reach the level of achievement we have today. And still we have problems. We polluted the atmosphere and so on. And because God has not been with us completely. We did this without God. Samyam Mun, he states in exposition of the divine principle, is the vision he had would have happened. If human beings had not fallen, we would have formed one global family, which may be likened to a body whose members are all interlinked with each other, with God as their head. Now, when we look at that first blessing, individual perfection, that oneness with God, is something we have to grow into. There's a growth period we can observe in the created world. So this growth period, all things grow through these three stages of formation, growth, and completion. And then they go through this line of perfection. I'll give an example. If you think of a tree, wonderful big tree, the beginning of its life is a seed. And it goes through a formation period where the seeds take root in the ground. It takes a period of time when their roots are down. And it goes through its formation period. After this, it can go through a growing period, become a growing tree, where most of its size is realized. But then it goes through a maturing stage, completion stage, where it becomes a mature tree. So when you see the apples on the tree, for example, you say, oh, that's the tree. But if you see it on a growing stage, you don't say it's a tree, you say it's a shrub or something like this, a growing tree. But there are three distinct stages. But once it's apples on the tree or whatever fruits it should have, then you say it's fulfilled, it's the purpose of its life. The apples will die this year, but they'll grow again next year, and so on and so on. Now the same is true for human beings too. If we look at the creation of human beings, we read in Genesis 2:7, "Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life." We'll go into in a bit later the full meaning of that. But first of all, God created man from dust, from the ground. That's the physical body. Dust symbolized in the elements and physical world. This grows through three stages. First as a baby, corresponding to a seed. The first 7 years of life, we are main character and personality is formed. And then, through mostly teenage years, we grow a lot until we finally become an adult, and we go through a maturing stage. And I think when our sexual organs are functioning properly, then we've reached the mature stage, a perfected stage. But this is only external, of course. But God created with just a breath. When you think that God created man from dust, but with just a breath, it means God started the process with just a breath. And that's the spiritual body. And that's why Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15:44, "It is sown a physical body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a physical body, there is also a spiritual body." Now the spiritual body resembles the physical body, but it grows through what's important for the spirit body is not physical elements, but love. That's why in our life that the baby experiences passive love. Passive love means just receiving love. The baby needs to receive love. So joy for a baby is receiving love. But then it goes through a stage, becomes a toddler, teenager. It finds more joy by sharing love, giving and receiving. But it's very conditional love. It's not fully developed. Until the person reaches parenthood, becomes a parent, and then a new experience again with love. There is more joy in giving unconditionally, which should happen. So we reach a stage of unconditional love, and this is very important because this is the love that God has. God experiences unconditional love. That's why the Apostle John said in 1 John 4:7 and 8, unless we understand love, we cannot understand God, because God is love. So the nature of God is love. So we're meant to grow in our ability to give and receive love until this is fully matured in unconditional love, and for the first time we really understand God and His heart, and we can receive the full love of God from that point. But in this growing stage, we haven't experienced it, so therefore we don't know it. And so we don't receive the full love of God, so therefore it's possible to choose something else, or be tempted away by something else, or some other love. But once we reach this stage where we receive the full love of God, this is so wonderful, nothing can tempt you away from it. So that's what was supposed to happen. This is the real meaning of individual perfection, the point where we become one with God through love. Now, what was meant to happen, all humanity was meant to grow through these three stages and reach the highest level of love, where we love other people fully, like this. Then we're supposed to, at a certain point, pass on and go to the spiritual world. We're not meant to live forever in the physical world. But where do we go there? We go to a place called heaven. So heaven means a world of love, where people love each other fully with this unconditional love. And that's, of course, is the most wonderful place to be. But unfortunately, this didn't happen due to the fall. And people have been growing up physically, but not spiritually, not with the capacity to love. And that's why we see numerous examples around us: broken families, people unable to love each other, unable to love their children, doing bad things to each other, because of the absence of this true love. And then people have been passing over into the spiritual world, and they end up in a place with no love. And the place of no love is hell. There's a place where people do bad things to each other there. And of course, this is the worst place to be. Because we live in the physical world, but we're meant to, point of death, to go to the spiritual world. Jesus said to Peter in this passage in Matthew 16:19, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Peter symbolized the people on earth. Not just Peter, but people on earth have the key to heaven. The key to heaven is on earth. Heaven means the spiritual world in this sense. So whatever you achieve on earth in terms of love, your development of your spirit, you'll take that with you in the spiritual world. You won't be able to take your money, your riches. You can take what's your inner content of your life. So sadly, if there isn't much love there, then there's not much to bring with you, unless you go a place short of heaven. So we'll look now at the spiritual world in a bit more depth. There's a physical world, which we know we have a physical body, in a world limited by time and space. But we have a spirit within us. The physical body has a limited existence. It won't live forever, but a spiritual body does. We have eternal existence. But it's not limited by time and space. It means, if I want to go from one city to another, I need to go through physical means. I need to drive by car, get a plane or train, or walk there. But in the spiritual world, if you want to go from one place to another, you don't move through air, you move through love. So if you love that place, or love the people there, you can be there. But that is the question. If I'm able to love that much, I can move. So that's why hell is often a place with no love, because you can't move. A confined space. We look now at how development of our spirit should take place through our daily life. For example, the relationship between the spiritual body and the physical body. Of course, they're within each other, but God relates to the spiritual mind. That's where we can feel and experience God. And we can feel this through, we call here life element, but life element means God's urge or God's love or inspiration to do a good action, for example. There'll be give and take between your spirit mind and the physical mind. Of course, if you don't respond to it, there's no benefit at all. But if you do follow the urge and you express a kind deed, a deed for another person, there's good thoughts and actions, gives out something to the world, love expressed, comes back in vitality elements. Give something back, give and take. That's the reason why we feel good. We feel good in ourselves when we do something good for others. So we can say, in this sense, this is like food for our spirit. You know. And also you could say, our spirit body is like a video recording of our life on the earth. And so conversely, of course, if we practice bad deeds, selfish deeds, do bad things to other people, an element comes back to our spirit here that makes our spirit ugly and bad, like poison. So of course we need a life of good deeds, a relationship with God, a life of good deeds, living our lives for the sake of others. We can see this parallel between our physical needs and our spiritual needs. Our physical body, in this physical world, we need two kinds of elements. We need positive elements. They come from above, in one sense, air and sunlight. They come free. But they're not enough by themselves. We need food and water. Food and water requires some effort to receive them. But a combination of both kinds of elements get infused in us, and we can grow healthily well. Now, spiritually, we have life elements. They come for free, in one sense, where they come from God. You know, but it's not enough by itself. No matter how great God is, we have to respond. We have to create vitality elements, a life of good actions, love expressed for the sake of others. And a combination of these elements enables our spirit to grow. So in other words, we grow in our ability to love. So therefore, there's three stages of life. The first stage, you've gone through already. We've all gone through. But think about this for a moment. This life in the womb. There's the baby in there in this environment of water. He's in there for about 9 months. Now the baby can't have any other consciousness of any other world. He lives by this umbilical cord where food and air go directly to his body through this umbilical cord, which is his lifeline. But in there, in order for the baby to transfer into the physical world, to be born, that lifeline has to be cut. So from the baby's point of view, this is death. Who's cutting my lifeline? But it's not death, as we know it's birth. And from this, he finds himself in another dimension, completely different, in the physical world as a physical body, in another environment of air. And he will be here, well, I put here 100 years, but it could be any period. It could be 1 day to any amount of time. But it's another world, another existence. But again, it's a limited existence. But we, in this physical world, like the baby, we have no consciousness of another existence. We may have beliefs, or people had experiences of it, but it will be limited knowledge. But we know, as our time in the womb is preparation for next existence. The baby in the womb doesn't know it, but the purpose of being in there is preparation for its next existence. So the purpose of our life in this world is our second womb, in one sense, is preparation for our next existence in the spiritual world. So we need to know what to develop. The baby needs to develop his heart and lungs. But we need to develop our ability to love in this world. Because at death, what we consider death, in the Bible, for instance, doesn't call it death. Death is separation from God's love as the real death. We all have eternal existence, whether we're good or bad. But what kind of existence is what is important. What we call death really is just a transfer to the next phase of life in a spiritual world, in a spiritual body. But we live then in an atmosphere of love, but this time for eternity. The love, as I mentioned, everything's determined by air in the physical world. If you can breathe air, you can move through, you can move around. In the spiritual world, everything's determined by love and your ability to love. Receive the love of God and give God's love to others. And this is the most important point. We've gone through this. People often get confused about what is spiritual and physical. People often think, well, spiritual is some insubstantial, some vague reality, some insubstantial existence. But not at all. Not at all. If you see the people who had spiritual experiences, they appear very substantially. The angels appeared to Abraham, 3 angels there, and the angel wrestled with Jacob. They appeared very substantial. Then they disappeared. But you find numerous examples of spiritual beings. Of course, they can go through a wall, they can appear and disappear. That doesn't mean they're not substantial. That means they're more substantial. People had near-death experiences. It's a common experience of people from various cultures around the world. They experience coming out of their body. People don't see them, but they can see them. They can't be seen, but they can see the physical people around them. They can see the doctors working on their body and so on. But they move around, but their body is not a vague experience. It's a very bodily experience. They can touch things, see things. But then they come back and they continue to life. But this gives us a glimpse of what is life like in life after death. So this is very good, great news, in fact, because this is what awaits us after we die. But what is important, though, is not just that it's important to live a fulfilled life on earth. Both lives, our physical life is essentially, we need to live a fulfilled life, internally and externally, but with God. So we have a happy existence here, and we pass over the spiritual world, it becomes a continuation of that. We need to fulfill the purpose of our life, and that needs to be fulfilled in our relationships, centered on God. If we leave God out, we will suffer the consequence, because we're not functioning properly. We need to know why God created us. But if we live a life centered on God, we can live a fulfilled life internally, and then this will naturally carry over. We'll live a fulfilled life externally. And then a whole dimension of life will be added quality to it. If we live our life centered on, as a priority, our own self-gratification, no matter how much money we have, no matter how much things we have, no matter how many things we do, it will always leave us empty in the end. We'll always need more and more. That's why very rich people, they always want more money. They want more money after that, because it doesn't bring the satisfaction they're expecting or pursuing. We need to pursue things internally, but in inner life, seek out God, seek stimulation for our mind through inner life with God. And then, when we experience that, that's the real joy. In other words, when we pray, we shouldn't just pray for things to get things, but the process of praying itself should bring its own reward. We should feel the joy of being with God, and then anything else is an add-on to that. And so this is we need to live a God-centered life. Now we need to know God, not just a vague belief in God, but know God in a personal way, and then all the other relationships built upon that will be enhanced and the whole life would take on a new dimension, a much needed added quality. So thank you very much.